That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Now, I have been on a mission. I mean, since we got this comment from Michael asking for us to go through and identify some players we need to be trading away before the NFL draft, I've been researching a lot of things. Obviously, we're looking at, pretty much every single pick inside the top 100, looking at the team distribution on how many picks do the New York Jets actually own and etc. But more importantly, I've been putting that little thermometer out there, trying to get the overall temperature of the Dynasty community, the regular fantasy football community, and what players are already being valued as if they are going to get replaced. Now, of course, I could come out here, I could waste your time. I could say, you know what? The Green Bay Packers, they have picks 22, 28, 53, and 59. You know what we should be doing? We should be going out there and selling Allen Lazard. Is that helping anybody? No, because your league mates, they're not idiots. Your league mates, they have a decent idea of what's going on. So they're not going to be willing to go out there and move a second round pick. They're not going to be willing to move the 202 for Allen Lazard because they know the Green Bay Packers are drafting a wide receiver. Same thing with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Pick 63 in dynasty drafts at the wide receiver position. And another thing we can look at, these guys on Underdog Fantasy, real money leagues, where Allen Lazard, from a redraft perspective, is being drafted as the wide receiver 50. Of course, that wouldn't be the case if the overall fantasy football community did not think these players were getting replaced. So we have to figure out what guys, their dynasty price has already been affected by the possibility of added target competition coming in. And we can actually maybe go one or two ways with this. We can look at those guys like Allen Lazard, Marquez Valdes-Scantling that you're getting massive discounts on. And we can say, hell yeah, those players, they should be going as late as they are. But at the same time, we could potentially go to Keep Trade Cut, look at some Dynasty ADP. We could go over to Underdog Fantasy, look at some redraft ADP to have an idea of some players that maybe are being priced as if they're going to get replaced. And we don't know the actual odds of that happening. If we go to our last live stream with Underdog Fantasy, I took Miles Sanders in like the 11th round. Now, trust me, I get it. It's a very real possibility that the Philadelphia Eagles go out there and draft a running back at 15, that they draft a running back at 18, that they draft a running back at 51, that they draft a running back at 83. But the difference between some of these running backs that are being valued as if they've already been replaced. Look at Miles Sanders, running back 32 in Dynasty, running back 34 on Underdog. You look at Devin Singletary, running back 40 in Dynasty. Running back 33 on Underdog. I don't think we need to be worried about these running backs. Now, of course, we need to keep it in the back of our minds. There's a real shot that the Philadelphia Eagles pick 51. They go out there and grab Kenneth Walker. That's in the range of outcomes. But there are 32 teams in the NFL. And by my estimation, there are two good running backs in this draft class with Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker. Not worried about anybody else. Go out there, go draft James Cook. He's not getting on the field with Miles Sanders. I will tell you that much right now. So we can use Underdog ADP. We can use Keep Trade Cut as tools to help us identify players we should actually be trading away. And of course, as we were saying, if you want to get into some of those underdog drafts, real money fantasy football drafts, you want to have some fun with your life, make sure you go to the link in the description, go to the link in the comment section, use promo code FLOCK when you make that deposit with Underdog Fantasy to get into some of those drafts, whether it's just with the public lobby, me on a live stream, and you make that deposit. They will match your deposit dollar for dollar up to 100 with promo code FLOCK. They will also get you our dynasty rankings, our rookie rankings, and our dynasty research book. Please take advantage of that. So we've kind of covered. I think some of these running backs are currently maybe discounted based on the fact that people think that they're going to get replaced. But these wide receivers, I don't know if we can say that for certain, because there are some fantastic, and I repeat, fantastic wide receivers in this draft class. You have players like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Treylon Burks, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, Jahan Dotson, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Sky Moore. All these options, I think, are going to be able to step on the field and almost immediately make an impact. I mean, a player we'll get to later on in the video, Terry McLaurin, Hell, he's not going to get 28, 27% of his team's targets if they decide to go out there and draft Drake London. So let's kind of go player by player and talk about some options that I think can get replaced that the Dynasty community is currently not valuing as if they will be replaced as they are with some of those options like Miles Sanders, like Allen Lazard, etc. In our first wide receiver, I will say, definitely, people understand that it's a real possibility. People understand it's a real possibility that the New York Jets go out there and draft someone to pair with Elijah Moore, because obviously this is what you see from those teams that have quarterbacks on rookie deals. They try to get them as many weapons as possible. This is what we saw with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. They take Burrow with the first overall pick, and in the second round of that same class, they go out there, they grab a T. Higgins, and the following season, they use a top 5 pick on Jamar Chase. Yeah, we see these teams go out there and try to put weapons around their quarterback. And here with the New York Jets, they took Zach Wilson with the second pick in the first round. They took Elijah Moore with the second pick in the second round. And now they're sitting with picks 4, which I'll tell you, they're not grabbing a wide receiver at 4. I'd be extremely surprised if that happens. They're most likely going offensive line. But they're sitting also with picks 10, 35, and 38. Pick 10, they're most likely going to get their choice. They're most likely going to be able to come away with someone like Garrett Wilson, come away with the Drake London, come away with the Jameson Williams, which honestly, they would all pair nicely with Elijah Moore. And Elijah Moore, yes, his dynasty value has dipped a little bit with this possibility, currently being drafted as the wide receiver 18 in Dynasty. Now, he is currently going ahead of some of those rookies. He's going ahead of Drake London. He's going ahead of Garrett Wilson in Dynasty drafts, and possibly going ahead of a wide receiver that there's no chance they add target competition because there's already so much there in Jerry Jeudy. Now, I want to bring up Elijah Moore as an example of a player that, yes, he can easily get target competition added into his offense, but it's not as easy as just going through and trading him away. The reason for this is with Elijah Moore in particular, I have already heard the sentiment from a lot of people that I almost agree with, that adding a wide receiver to play on the outside is not necessarily going to be detrimental to Elijah Moore. Now, I think a lot of people get confused by this because the New York Jets, they need another wide receiver. Taking Drake London to play that role on the outside that Corey Davis has really disappointed with despite the contract, that's going to help Elijah Moore a ton from a real life perspective. If we're talking about Elijah Moore in his efficiency, if we're talking about how defensive coordinators are not just going to be able to zero in on the middle of the football field, and instead they're going to have to pay attention to the boundaries with Drake London, yes, that's going to help Elijah Moore from a real life perspective. But just because Elijah Moore would be able to slide into the slot and Drake London would be able to go on the outside and Elijah Moore would fit naturally in the slot and it would be fantastic for the New York Jets offense, that doesn't mean he's going to draw more targets. It doesn't mean he's going to score more fantasy points. He's going to have less targets. He will have less fantasy points when that happens. So I know we're kind of talking in circles here, but I don't think Elijah Moore is someone you have to sell right now. I think what you could potentially do is hold Elijah Moore. If this team does decide to go wide receiver in the first round, taking a Drake London at pick 10, then yes, Elijah Moore will most likely have his dynasty value hit slightly, but I can already tell you the analysis everybody's going to have because it will be a great fit from an NFL perspective. Everybody will say, oh no, this is going to help Elijah Moore. This is going to help him, which it will from a real life perspective, drawing less coverage. But like we said, from a fantasy football perspective, I don't think that's true. So I would then look to sell Elijah Moore at a slightly lower price afterwards once we know what that wide receiver is. But there's a chance that instead they go George Pickens, pick 35. They get Jahan Dotson, pick 38. I mean, who knows? If that happens, I think Elijah Moore is fine because I think he can slide to the inside. But the difference between a George Pickens, a Jahan Dotson acquisition is those wide receivers we don't expect to become the wide receiver one on the offense with their target share, where we would with someone like Garrett Wilson or Drake London based on the prospect profile they have compared to Elijah Moore. So I know we just rambled on pretty much about nothing, telling you nothing concrete. But here with Elijah Moore, what I would do is hold him for now with the assumption that even if they do go wide receiver in round 1, which is a real possibility, You'll be able to sell him later. I think that the Dynasty community is not going to lower his value too much. However, a wide receiver that I am very worried about, Devonta Smith. Now, I know we've had a lot of people coming out and telling us, oh, Mason, you need to go buy Devonta Smith. We need to talk about buying low on Smith. I'll agree with you. If you look at the prospect he was coming into the NFL, I think he's a much better prospect and a much better player than people are currently giving him credit for. However, the Philadelphia Eagles are sitting with picks 15, 18, 51, and 83. And obviously, Smith is already in a very bad situation with Jalen Hurts. But what happens if all of a sudden this team goes out there and drafts Chris Olave, pick 15, drafts Jameson Williams, pick 18, or Treylon Burks? I will tell you this, Devonta Smith, I think it will be a very different situation with how people will discuss it compared to Elijah Moore. Based on what I have heard from everybody in the flock community, I think people will be way more worried about Devonta Smith, where his value, I would actually assume, would take a much larger hit than someone like Elijah Moore. And with Devonta Smith, he is currently being valued ahead of Elijah Moore. He's being valued ahead of Chris Godwin. He's the wide receiver 15 in Dynasty. So personally, I'm not buying on Devonta Smith right now. I think that it's intriguing to say you play in 10 Dynasty leagues. If you have Devonta Smith in one of those leagues, to go out there, try to sell him for Chris Godwin today, because Chris Godwin is an example of a player. His value can't go down. His value is going to be the exact same today as it is in August. We know the Buccaneers, they're not going with the wide receiver in this draft. So in our one league where we have him, we trade away Devonta Smith for Chris Godwin. And we wait until after the NFL draft where they go out there and they decide to add Treylon Burks, pick 15. They get Treylon Burks, pick 18. They take one of these wide receivers. After that happens, then we could potentially go out there and buy Devonta Smith at a massive, massive discount, which I would then be interested in. If he falls to, say, wide receiver 25, if he falls 10 spots, which is entirely possible, then hell yeah, I'll be willing to trade my late first for Devonta Smith every single day of the week. But if I have him now, I'm definitely worried about his value going down from where it is. Now, our next wide receiver is someone that, for whatever reason, I've seen a lot of NFL mock drafts, assuming this team goes wide receiver round one, yet the Dynasty community, they haven't really taken it into consideration with his value. Terry McLaurin, currently he's being drafted as wide receiver 19 in Dynasty. If we go over to those real money leagues to figure out where he's being drafted on Underdog, it's going to be a similar situation. Now, keep in mind with Terry McLaurin, yes, he was drafted in 2019, which makes it seem like he should be very young. Terry McLaurin is not young. He stayed all 5 years at Ohio State. But Terry McLaurin currently being drafted as the wide receiver 22 on Underdog. So Underdog drafters are a little bit lower on Terry McLaurin than people that are playing Dynasty. And like I said, I think, honestly, Underdog is where people know what they're doing. But with this pick at 11, I think the Washington football team are highly, highly incentivized to go wide receiver. Because with Terry McLaurin, while yes, he has been a suitable wide receiver one in Washington, I think that he needs help. I think this is a wide receiver that if you look at his efficiency, it's so damn hard when the second option in that offense, from a targets per game perspective, guys like Logan Thomas, J.D. McKissick are up there. Going back to what we were talking about with the New York Jets and how it's probably a good real-life NFL move for them to go and get a boundary wide receiver and move Elijah Moore in the slot, but it may not be great from a fantasy football perspective. This makes so much sense with Terry McLaurin, especially if this team wants to run a lot of two wide receiver sets. Who cares? Go get Garrett Wilson at pick 11. I think Garrett Wilson would be a natural fit with McLaurin here. And honestly, I hate to say this, but if Garrett Wilson were to go to Washington, of course, if we're drafting a redraft league, I'm taking Terry McLaurin over Garrett Wilson. But if we're drafting a dynasty team, if you ask me who the wide receiver one would be in Washington 2 years from now, I'm going Garrett Wilson. I'm going Drake London. I think with their prospect profiles, they have a higher ceiling than McLaurin. I think this is a wide receiver that easily has space to go down in dynasty rankings. So he is one of these guys that I'd be willing to just move on from before the NFL draft. And now our next guy is a player that's being drafted as a win now option. and his team just has a crap ton of draft capital. It's going to be Brandon Cooks. Now, with Brandon Cooks, there is a possibility he gets moved from the Houston Texans. I mean, this is a wide receiver that's playing on a team that has no incentive to win right now. I mean, if you're Houston, what you want to do is you want to just lose every game this season. You want to get either CJ Stroud, you want to get Bryce Young in next year's class with the first overall selection. Of course, that's what you want to do if you're the Houston Texans. And here with Brandon Cooks, this is another wide receiver that is being propped up, very similar to Terry McLaurin, because last year, there was no other option in his offense where he came out and from a targets per game perspective, he dominated. He dominated. But he was competing for targets with someone like Nico Collins. Nico Collins was out half the year as well. Brandon Cooks has had no competition in Houston. And if we look at this Houston Texans team, they have picks 3, which with that third pick, they're not going wide receiver. They're probably going to go offensive line. But they have 13, where that's right in the range of where we're expecting these guys like Drake London, like Garrett Wilson, like Jameson Williams that we've been talking about consistently. They have pick 37. That's going to be in the George Pickens, the Jahan Dotson, the Christian Watson range. They have pick 68. Maybe they go after and get someone like John Mechie. They have pick 80. Maybe they go get a Justin Ross or they go get a Wan'Dale Robinson. This is another team that I think Brandon Cooks is being propped up because his projected target share in this offense, where with all this capital in a great receiving class, you could easily see the Houston Texans saying, you know what, maybe, just maybe, there's an off chance we have something in Davis Mills. And if that actually is true, we need to give Davis Mills a fair chance. We need to get him another wide receiver to play alongside him. And even if Davis Mills is not the guy, hell, we want to make sure that we're going to have a replacement for Brandon Cooks next season because he's on a 1-year contract. So I think that you could easily see this team going wide receiver. Right now, Brandon Cooks in Dynasty leagues is being valued ahead of Michael Thomas. He's being valued ahead of George Pickens. And of course, if you go over to Underdog, his ADP is going to be a little bit higher because here you're looking at a wide receiver that's going to be a little bit older, better from a redraft perspective. But what's really funny is Brandon Cooks older than Michael Thomas, obviously. Michael Thomas is being valued lower in Dynasty than Brandon Cooks by keep trade cut. However, in those real money leagues on Underdog that we keep talking about, Michael Thomas, wide receiver 26, Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 32. Like if you could right now go and trade Brandon Cooks for Michael Thomas, sign me up. I don't care if the Saints are someone that goes out there and drafts a wide receiver. Now our next player is going to be Michael Gallup. Now with Michael Gallup, I want to bring him up and say, I would not be surprised if Dallas goes out there and grabs a wide receiver. I am almost expecting the Dallas Cowboys to go out there and do just that. There are very few players currently being valued lower than Michael Gallup that I'd trade Gallup for. I mean, someone like Christian Kirk would make a lot of sense because with Christian Kirk, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot harder for the Jacksonville Jaguars to go out there and get that added in target competition. But the Dallas Cowboys, they have picked 24. If somehow, some way you get Treylon Burks falling there, unlikely given the fact that you have the Green Bay Packers at 22, I would not be surprised if this team pulls the trigger after moving on from Amari Cooper. We saw them take the value with CeeDee Lamb back in 2020. Whenever, I mean, everybody thought, hell, this team has Amari Cooper, this team has Michael Gallup. Oh, exactly what are they doing? I think Dallas is completely in play for a wide receiver. I don't know if I can trade Gallup. I just love me some Michael Gallup, but I don't think the Dynasty community is really taking into account that they could go out there and replace him. And our last player, I think he's a sell for a multitude of reasons. This is someone else that's currently being valued ahead of Christian Kirk from a Dynasty perspective, being valued ahead of Jahan Dotson from a Dynasty perspective as well. Yet if Dotson goes to his team, I definitely think he's behind Dotson. This is Gabriel Davis. Now with Gabriel Davis, the Bills have picks 25, 57, and 89. Now, of course, they're not going to have access to those elite level wide receivers at the top of round 1. But this is a team that just lost out on Emmanuel Sanders. It's a team that lost out on Cole Beasley. And what I've been saying lately in the live streams is we hear with Gabriel Davis, I don't want to just write him a pass saying, okay, yeah, of course he's not going to produce when you got Cole Beasley, when you have Emmanuel Sanders on the roster, 34-year-old Emmanuel Sanders, 33-year-old Cole Beasley. Of course he can't get over those guys. even though he has a lot of talent. I don't think those two things can be true. I don't think that Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley can limit Gabriel Davis to 30 receiving yards a game his second year, and Gabriel Davis is just some sleeping dragon, some talent that really just can't hurdle over 33-year-old Cole Beasley. I think if this team brings in really any wide receiver, they're almost immediately the wide receiver 2 alongside Stephon Diggs. I'd be using the current projected depth chart very similarly, going and trying to trade him for Christian Kirk, going and trying to trade him for Jahan Dotson. I know he is a little bit younger, but still, I mean, Christian Kirk in Dynasty is just so much more appealing. Now, of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you with the video tomorrow.